Hey guys, Jason here, bringing you the long-awaited Duel Masters draft format video. Draft Masters, as I like to call it, is something we've been working on for a while, and a couple of us recently got together to test the latest iteration. I was satisfied with how it went, so I'm happy that I'm finally able to share it with you guys. The video I'll play will show the drafting process, and I'll talk about the background and mechanics of Draft Masters while you guys watch us pick our cards. As a quick intro, drafting is an alternate format that exists in TCGs, where participants, instead of using pre-constructed decks, pick from the same limited pool of cards. I think Duel Masters is a game that lends itself to drafting remarkably well, and outside of this, I had a couple of different motivations for wanting to design a draft format of my own. One, I really wanted to create an environment where my friends could just pick up and play without having to worry too much about matchups. Two, I liked the idea of a format that would bring back memories of the schoolyard meta, where it all began for us. And three, I felt it could be a great way to give cards that tend to be overlooked in constructed format a chance to shine. So the way it works is we created 3 tiers of cards, A, B, and C. The A tier is meant to contain cards which have the strongest mix of versatility and power. The B tier contains the general meat of the deck, and the C tier contains the finishing touches, techie cards that might help with certain matchups, or cards which might act as slight consistency boosters. There are 400 cards in the total card pool, 20 unique cards per civilization at 4 copies each. In terms of unique cards, there are 5 in A tier, 10 in B tier, and 5 in C tier, and the total number of cards drafted is fixed for each tier, 10 from A, 20 from B, and 10 from C. The main reason we draft in tiers is to ensure everyone has similar chances of drafting cards of comparable power levels. I wanted to avoid situations where someone could draft a deck full of staples, while another had hardly any, which could happen if we had a total combined card pool. I know that in Magic the Gathering, cube format is a very popular way to draft, but cubes traditionally contain one of each card, and I didn't think the DMTCG card pool was big enough to support that. Instead, I went with a deck limit of 4 because it allows people to theoretically replicate counts of a proper deck, but also prevents a single person from hoarding all the best cards. I think it's possible to abolish the tier system by filling the format with the strongest cards, but I think it takes away from the schoolyard meta I had in mind. For the drafting process, I went with a top-down approach, whereby we start drafting with the best cards and eventually make our way down to C tier. We reveal 10 random cards from a tier and go around in a circle where each player picks 1 card until everyone has taken a card from the 10. The remaining cards are then scrapped and remain out of play for the rest of the game. In the event more than 2 copies of the same card appear in a single reveal, the extra copies are returned to the pile and are replaced. This is to prevent players from being unfairly punished for their position in the rotation. For example, everyone but you can draft Hulkus because you went last, or those from building tribal decks. For example, all 4 Barquips are revealed, meaning the remaining copies get binned. We then reveal another 10 random cards and another person gets a chance to pick first, and repeat the aforementioned process. The idea is for the person who most recently picked first to pick last in the next rotation to balance things out, and we just go around the table to give everyone a chance to pick first. Funnily enough, keeping track of this is the hardest part of the game. Anyway, we keep doing this until we run out of cards, and when drafting is completed, every player should end up with a 40-card deck composed of 10 cards from A tier, 20 from B tier, and 10 from C tier. The entire deck construction process usually takes about half an hour. We leave our picks face up because seeing what decks people are making is fun, but more importantly, it also gives rise to these mini metagames where people can start drafting counter cards given what the others are doing, for example blocker hate, or intentionally picking cards to deny others, like picking Guardian Evil Bait if someone chooses Larbagir. Because of how the game has been designed, it can theoretically support 2 to 10 players, but I think the sweet spot is 5 to 6. With these numbers, you have a lot of people fighting for the same cards, but people are still able to more or less build what they want. Fewer players means people can build more consistent decks, which can be good, but takes away from the janky nature of drafting. And more players means people often get forced into picking certain cards depending on where they are in the rotation, which hurts deck building a lot. There are definitely ways to address this. Scaling the number of revealed cards and increasing the total card pool can help support larger groups, and restricting the maximum card count from 4 to 2, for example, can help preserve the janky nature of drafting if you're playing with fewer people. At the end of the day, though, it's all about seasoning to your own tastes. Don't worry if you're finding this hard to follow, I'm going to leave our recommended rules in the video description. So now that we've gone over the rules, I'll quickly touch on the cards for each tier, starting with A tier. In Light, we have Holy Awe, Ares, Mysterious, Colon, and Palo-Elysis. For Water, we've got Aqua Surfer, Aqua Hulkus, Energy Stream, Emerald, and Spiral Gate. For Darkness, we have Terrapit, Locomotiver, Lost Soul, Death Smoke, and Photocide. For Fire, we have Twin Cannon, Burst Shot, Magmarex, Searing Wave, and Pyrofighter Magnus. And for Nature, we have Fairy Life, Bronze Arm Tribe, Bark Whip, Natural Snare, and Dreaming Moon Knife. From our testing, we found Light and Nature to have the least attractive picks out of A tier. Palo-Elysis was a very recent addition and was meant to incentivize people to pick Light. It felt like a decent addition since Petrova would have been way too powerful, and so far Palo-Elysis is testing fine. Ares is a bit of a strange inclusion here, and one that probably won't last. We put it in as a Photocide check, but it's just much worse than Photocide. Magmarex used to be an A tier, but got demoted because no one would pick it. And Fal Iga also used to be an A tier, but was also oftentimes ignored, and we ended up removing it from the draft entirely, though I could still see a return. For Water, I think the picks are straightforward. These seemed like the strongest Water cards in the pool, which is why they're here. Water was the best Civ to draft, so we ended up removing a handful of cards to nerf it. I found Corile and Thrashcrawler were a bit too strong, and after kicking them, I was able to promote Emerald and Spiral Gate. Like Water, I think the Darkness picks are mostly straightforward as well. In the earliest version of the draft, Lost Soul was in B tier because I wasn't sure how effective mana ramping would be, but A tier is where it belongs. Photocide is really interesting because it used to be in B tier, but was always an insta-pick, and that completely warped the metagame, so we had to promote him. And Death Smoke is here because its versatility is quite valuable in this format, and it's also an answer to Photocide. Fire's A tier has the best board clears and speed attackers, so these aren't too surprising. Twin Cannon is the strongest non-evolution attacker in the format, and Pyro is Pyro. Searing Wave was understood to be an A tier card from the beginning, but Burst Shot started in B and was promoted because, like Photocide, it was just an insta-pick that was too good for where it was. Magmarex is a very recent addition. We thought it would be interesting because it's a board clear creature, which is unique. The jury is still out on Magmarex, but I suspect it'll be a spicy pick when lots of people are drafting. Nature, as mentioned, was previously very unattractive outside of Bronze Arm Tribe. When I was thinking about what I wanted each Civ to bring to the table, I felt that boasting the most consistent tribal race would be a great role for Nature because of how fast and plentiful Beastfolk are. Bark Whip was previously in B, but I promoted him to A to make deck building trickier for Beastfolk players, since it would have to compete with the best Evo baits, but not compete with Storm Wrangler, who we have in B. The Beastfolk race is a very strong archetype in this format, so if you want to build it, you have to commit early, and so far, someone has always drafted Tribal Beastfolk. Dreaming Moon Knife is the first of a handful of OCG exclusive cards. It's Beastfolk Poisonous Mushroom, so I thought it fit right in. Moving on to B tier, for Light, we have Laura Giga, Soul Gala, Larba Gear, Psyforce, Diamond Cur, Moonlight Flash, Bonds of Justice, Emerald Grass, Magmarex, and Miel, or Mile. For Water, we have Hunterfish, Saucerhead Shark, Brain Serum, Aqua Guard, Crystal Lancer, Eureka Charger, Pekoton, Illusionary Merfolk, Teleportation, and Phantom Fish. For Darkness, we have Bloody Skeeto, Ghost Touch, Horrid Worm, Chaos Worm, Proclamation of Death, Masked Horror, Giga Slug, Necrodragon Gilland, Mongrel Man, and Swamp Worm. For Fire, we have Tornado Flame, Comet Missile, Rumblegate, Meteosaur, Rothus the Traveler, Divine Machine Armor Valborg, who's an OCG exclusive, Phantom Dragon's Flame, Immortal Baron Vorg, Mini Titan Ged, and Hyper Sprint Warrior Uzesel. And for nature, we have Shaman Totem, the last of the OCG exclusives, Burning Mane, Torcon, Crowwinger, Storm Wrangler, Rumbling Terrahorn, Cannon Shell, Dimension Gate, Muscle Charger, and Essence Elf. B tier is my favorite tier because it gives a lot of cards a new lease on life. Cards that interact with multiple cards but don't see a lot of play in Constructed are actually frontrunners here. Moonlight Flash, Bonds of Justice, Teleportation, and Rumblegate are all great examples of this. All civs also feature a tribal evolution race and are armed with offensive and defensive capabilities, but from experience, light and dark lean towards the control end of the spectrum. Aside from having Mysterious, Light's main value proposition is in providing the best blockers, and I guess the flexible tap cards. It also features Cyforce, who is the strongest non-evolution attacker in the draft. Guardians are the tribal evolution here, and while Larbagear is traditionally an aggro card, the Guardians have been able to lend themselves to all sorts of strategies. Water is, in my opinion, the best civ in the DMTCG, and in Draft Masters as well, so much so that we had to kick out some good cards to balance things out. Water is of course used for draw and for bounce. Liquid People is the tribal evolution race here, and Lancer is the strongest attacker in the format. Because of how good Water is and how strong Lancer is, we intentionally made Liquid People hard to draft by putting Hulkus and Surfer in the same tier, and also by having few Evo baits in general. We also have Pekotan in this, an OCG exclusive which DM Plays fans will be familiar with. I wanted to keep the Merfolk engine, and without Corile, we were in need of a decent Cyberlord replacement. Pekotan actually received an errata in DM Plays to make it more like Magmarex. Its OCG text requires you to have fewer cards in your hand than your opponent for the draw effect to trigger, and this is what we're going with. Teleportation is a very strong card, and one of those cards that might seem a bit too good for B tier, but not strong enough for A, so it's kind of tricky to deal with, but it's nice to see the card in the spotlight for once. Moving on to Darkness, like in Constructed, the main reason to play Darkness is discard, since it's the only civ that can do it. Ghost Touch and Masked Horror act as artificial extra copies for Locomotiver, and the tribal evolution race here is Parasite Worms, which seems to best lend itself to control strategies. There are also some funky cards here that I really like. Gigaslug was intended to be a soft counter to the early evolution creatures, but is balanced by being easy to remove, and Necrodragon Gilland is a very early double breaker that also happens to trade with the early Evos I keep talking about. Fire, interestingly enough, is the only civ that doesn't seem to have any resource accumulating cards. Most of the fire cards in this tier are just generally useful splash cards that lean slightly more towards the aggro end of the spectrum. Humans are the tribal evolution race for fire and feature another OCG card in Divine Machine Armor Valborg. If you remember Armored Groblav in the TCG, it's basically the same card, but it costs way less. It's a really early double breaker, but I want to say is balanced by not being too easy to draft. It's still early days for Valborg, but this is an addition I really like. Speaking of, Hyper Sprint Warrior Uzesel is another pick people seem to like. It's yet another speed attacker and can out the early evolutions, but like Gigaslug, is balanced by being easy to remove. Nature's B tier is composed mostly of Beastfolk Evo bait. I think the most interesting card in the Nature lineup is the OCG exclusive Shaman Totem, who really spiced things up and I think might need to be promoted. Its come into play effect lets you draw a card for each race you have in the battle zone. We were originally debating whether to give it its OCG effect, which doesn't let you draw for Mystery Totem, or its DM Plays effect, which does. We first went with the DM Plays effect, which is what you'll see in the upcoming videos, but we soon realized that this is way too good, so the OCG effect is what we'd recommend, and probably what we'll use going forward. We also have Rumbling Terrahorn in here. It's another advantage generating card for nature. We actually had it in A tier at first, but we had to demote it because no one was picking it. Storm Wrangler is present here as well, and ties in with how nature's big selling point is tribal beastfolk, which we've already talked about. Unsurprisingly, nature is the only civilization to have more than one evolution creature. Muscle Charger was the final addition to our nature section in the draft. It can be viewed as a more expensive fairy life, but it also gives rise to some funny interactions, so we like it a lot. And finally for C tier, for light, we have Solar Ray, Dianork, Logic Cube, Draco Barrier, and Cenotine Jade Tree. For water, we have Flood Valve, Hyper Squid Walter, Hunter Cluster, Riptide Charger, and Aqua Bouncer. For darkness, we have Gregorian Worm, Dark Reversal, Bone Spider, Critical Blade, and Wailing Shadow. For fire, we have Brawler Xyler, Crimson Hammer, Bombat, Volcano Charger, and Ruthless Sky Terror. And for nature, we have Mighty Shouter, Innocent Hunter, Mana Nexus, Vine Charger, and Cavern Raider. So C tier is the last tier that I'm going to talk about real quick. These cards are intended to add consistency to an already existing theme or act as text to arm against specific matchups or situations. In the light section, you will notice that we have Solar Ray and Draco Barrier, two cards which essentially do the same thing. We really don't like the idea of featuring cards that do the exact same thing in the same tier, but Draco Barrier turned into a meme of being Kelvin's most powerful card, so we just had to keep it in, but I think the mature thing to do would be to remove Draco Barrier, bump something down from B, and then chuck in Foul. For water, Hyper Squid Walter is meant to help add consistency to the Merfolk engine, and Aqua Bouncer can act as additional bait for Crystal Lancer, but is surprisingly solid even without it. Flood Valve was a late addition due to the removal of Thrash Crawler, and it's fine. For darkness, Gregorian Worm is there to add consistency to a tribal worm deck. Wailing Shadow and Bone Spider are neat because they are serviceable attackers and can also out the early evolution creatures. Fire has more Weenie Kill and another speed attacker, and another Valborg bait, but Ruthless Sky Terror I think is the standout card here. Ruthless is a great example of a card that really benefits from this format because of what it can do. It's able to police the field, especially against the early evolutions, and can really oppress water decks if the opponent can't get rid of it. Sometimes I feel like Ruthless should be promoted because it's kind of like a mini Photocide, but right now I think it's okay where it is. Nature, unsurprisingly, has more Beast Folk to give the race even more consistency, but you'll notice that they all cost more than 2. Innocent Hunter, I think, is very interesting, and it fills a very cool niche in helping decks with branching evolution lines, like if you're running Beast Folk and Liquid People, or Beast Folk and Human, something like that. Seeing Mana Nexus here is a bit sad, but it just wasn't an appealing card to draft, but still, I think it could be a decent leftover pick when drafting with many players, and also a decent tech against aggro. When choosing the cards for Draft Masters, I really wanted to replicate what it was like playing Duel Masters in school, and I wanted to make sure there was no playstyle, whether aggro, mid-range, or control, that was totally superior. I don't think the cards you see here are the be-all and end-all of Duel Masters drafting, but I think they are a good starting point. Ultimately, I think Draft Masters is a fun way to combine luck, strategy, adaptability, and nostalgia, and I hope this video was helpful if you were thinking about trying something similar. We'll be uploading the games in the coming weeks, but that's all for now, so as usual, thank you for watching, stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.